Alright, in this video, I'm going to show you my Neovim configuration. It has now been migrated to Lua, and I want to show you how I went about that, some of the gotchas, some of the greatness, some of the holes. Let's get started. Now, first of all, as you can see here, I'm in my init.lua. Let's take a look at the structure that I now have for my Neovim config. I have my after folder, just like normal, in my runtime path, and I have my file type plugins. Nothing's changed there. I'll point out that you're going to continue to use file type plugins. That is an area that is still being worked on as far as Neovim and the Lua API, and those would still be written in Viml or VimScript. Okay, and then the file that we're in right now is the init.lua, replacing the init.vim. You have your Lua folder, which is where we'll be spending most of the time. This just has my Packer compiled file, and this is old stuff here and spell. Okay, so we'll be spending most of our time looking through these and discussing how this all comes together. And you normally have your vimrc or your init.vim, and then you'd have your after folder with the different file type plugins and other things, and you can put in your own custom Vim files. I have my init.lua here, which is where things get started. This is the entry point for Neovim, and it will automatically look for init.lua the same way that it looked for init.vim. So if you transition in the way that I'm going to discuss and then you just rename the file, then that's all you should really need to do. But you likely will run into some interesting things, and hopefully I'll show you how to get past those things. So first of all, I have this Joel plugins, and you just saw that I had the under Lua Joel plugins. That's what that is, okay? And that'll be the same for the other ones as well, for telescope, mappings, completion, etc. For plugins, I have both my legacy plugins as far as how they're configured, and I need to move them from Vim plug to Packer, and I'm just slowly doing that stuff. It's not super critical, but the config though is now in Lua and in a plugins file. So I'll show you this. So you can see here I have a to-doa to migrate the rest of the legacy plugin config. So right now I'm using this vim command function and just putting in the Viml or VimScript. It just takes a string and you put your string of VimScript in there. This is a great way to start your migration over to Lua, is just take your current VimScript and pass it into the command function from the Lua API on the Vim global. What happens is it gets parsed and used the same way that it would if it were just sitting in a .vim file. And the way that I started this was I had my init.vim file, and then I put in a Lua block, and then within the Lua block I started using this vim command and putting my Vim script into those until all I had left in my init.vim file was the Lua blocks. And at that point, the idea was, let's remove the beginning and end of the Lua block and change the file to a Lua file, and we should be good to go. However, it seems like it's that easy, and it mostly is. This command works really well. It can parse just about everything, and everything works as expected. But you'll run into some things that it has questions about. It has some trouble with backslashes and some other things that you would need to tinker with. But for the most part, it is pretty great. It evaluates your Vim script and does everything you'd expect. You might think, okay, well, I've put things into these commands and I'm in Lua. But, now I just have another layer of abstraction. What have I really gained here? That is a good question. And the reason is it gets you on the path to having things in Lua and starting to use the modularization and getting things organized in a nice clean way for you to maintain and update your Neovim configuration. The other part is that you're going to have to use Vim command anyway, because there is not a Lua API for everything yet. So auto commands, for example, you're going to have to just pass in the auto command string. Some folks out in the community have written some helpers to make it nice, and there is a PR in Neovim for getting the auto commands working through the API. There's no problem with just using Vim script and putting them in the command. Now, you'll want to start moving things out and using Lua, but that's a good way to just get started. Just throw your Vim script inside of these Vim commands and then start factoring them out of there and using Lua. So it's a process, but it gives you nice satisfaction that, hey, I'm over here and I'm getting some benefits from Lua as far as organization goes. And then you can start tinkering around with factoring them out of these Vim commands and into actual Lua. So you can see here that I am using Vim plug, and I'm just using it for these particular plugins. And that's only because I haven't, basically copied and pasted them down to Packer yet. It's just, everything's kind of a process, and I'm going to want to delete that Vim plug folder and uninstall Vim plug after that. So just, one thing at a time. But a lot of the plugins that I use are down here and using Packer. So you can see that Packer itself, which is self-managing, telescope stuff, and LSP, that kind of thing. I'll be putting links to a couple blog posts in the description of this video that are really good about talking about transitioning to Lua and what are some of the things that you can do and can't do. For Packer, what you can do is set up dependencies. You can say that Galaxy line, which is what I'm using for my status line, that it requires NVim web dev icons. You don't have to specify separately anywhere that you want to install that. Then that will get installed and updated when this particular plugin gets installed. And you can put these dependencies on different plugins that require them, so that if you were, say, to switch from Galaxy line to some other thing, then you all of a sudden would start wondering, hey, where are my web dev icons? Because once you have web dev icons installed, they start magically appearing in different plugins, and you might miss them. They're not terribly useful, but it's kind of fun. It might be a good idea to pull it out as a dependency and put it at the top level, and then just mark down which plugins require it, just so that you have that dependency there. And Ale here is almost done as far as being inside of my Neovim configuration. I still need it for linting a bit with JavaScript, and so it's still around. So you can see here that setting up the plugins is nice, and then you can set up your, if you have local plugins, just point Packer to them. That's the plugin aspect, and you see I have them just mixed here, the old ones here, and then I go with Packer, and then I will tick these things off one by one and put them into Packer, and then kill off Vim plug and making sure everything works correctly. And I'll need to move the undo tree folder over, that sort of thing. All right, so now mappings. In my mappings file here, I am using some proper Lua API here to set some of my key mappings. And then you can see here that I have these auto commands in this Vim command block because, again, with auto commands, you'll need to have this Vim command function parse those. And it all works perfectly fine. You can just copy and paste from your Vim script right into here, and it works well. And then there is a PR open for getting the auto commands working through the Lua API. So for now, you have to have them parsed. And you can see here that I have these also in the same Vim command block to set my background and stuff like that. And this is just because I haven't gotten to them yet. And some other options there. Now, all of these can be moved down, and some of them I left the way they are so that I can show you the difference here between some of these things. So when you're using the Vim global from the Lua API, you have your options that you can set, or this is the the options API, if you will. They are working on, the Neovim team that is, on either a second way of doing this or improving the current way. That may make you say, well, I'll just wait and leave these things in the Vim command function, because what is the point if they're going to change it? And I don't think that it's going to be a breaking change and break your configuration here. I just think that you'll have a nicer way of expressing these things. Right now, it's fairly consistent with what you're used to with Viml. The difference is that you need to know the scope of things. So some things are Windows scoped, some things are global scoped, and some things are buffer scoped. And you may not know off the top of your head what some of these are. And so for buffer scope, you use the BO table and you'll stick on the particular options that you want and use the value that you had. Global scope uses the O table. The only thing that I'd note here is that when you have a string as a value, you need to put quotes around it. So you can't just put split in there. But for other types of values like numbers and Boolean, then it's perfectly fine. And for Windows scoped items, you'll use the WO table. And so you might be wondering, well, how do I know what's what? What you can do is you go into your help and you can say relative number. And when you're looking at relative number, you can see that it says local to window. That is where you need to set it. So this would need to be Windows scoped. So you would want to use the WO. And if you look just up above, you'll see that regexp engine is global, and so that would go on the O. And if we take a look at ink search, so ink search, you can see global. So you'll want to put that on the O, and then we can look at tab stop. Tab stop. You can see that's local to buffer. So in Vim script, you didn't have to specify this. You could just put anything anywhere, and then if you blindly did that, you might get unexpected results. But now you're more explicit about it, which is kind of nice, because you'll, even though that information's always been in the help files, now you can kind of understand it better and why you might want to set things as local or buffer, global, window. Some of this other stuff in the help file is going to make more sense, and now you can explicitly set this stuff, and then you can start thinking about, oh, well, if that's buffer scoped, then I possibly don't want that set here. I want that set somewhere else, and So you can make good use of that. All right, and then you have your global Vim variables that you set for different things like NetRW or plugins. And I left these here to show the difference in how that translates into the Lua API. So here you have these lets with the global scope, and so NetRW win size and getting rid of the banner and that sort of stuff. So you can see that what you want to do is use the G table and then just the name of your variable and then the value. And that's it. It's fairly simple. And so if we look here at vimg, you can see that it's for a global editor variables. You just use the table that's appropriate for your particular variable. So if you have buffer scoped or window scoped variable, then this is where you'd set it. All the stuff is pretty well documented. In fact, really well documented. You can just go through your help and type this stuff out. And of course, you can always just do the Lua help and go through that. And so what you'll want to do is you can just go here to the Lua intro and pop through this, and it'll start. You just kind of can go through and learn all about what you need to do here as far as the syntax around the language, and they give you an example of how to do a plugin here and Lua commands and all the stuff that you'll do working with Lua. And then you get into the interfacing with Vim script, and then going through the different standard modules. So, you'll want to read through that if you're really interested in digging in to that. So that's what you have there with mappings. Okay, now this is my telescope file, and this one is a little bit different, but there's no good reason for it at the moment, and that is that under Joel here, everybody else is top level, but they're generic. So for instance, completion, really I'm using compy. In config I have some LSP stuff and tree setter stuff, and mappings is generic, and status line is really just my galaxy line stuff, but it could be anything. So if I switch things out, I can just continue to use these. They're not specific to a particular plugin, except for with Telescope. And the other thing I did with Telescope is that I have a Telescope folder with a init underneath, and that is because I'm working on some other Telescope stuff for myself and possibly to contribute to the Telescope repo. And I just want to, try things out and kind of keep it separate from my other stuff, but still have it under Telescope. Another pattern that you'll see for structure is that someone will have a plugins folder and then have a tree sitter Lua and a LSP Lua, and that is probably the route I'll end up in. But for now, I just sort of have this plugins file and then these other top level stuff. So it's still going to get organized, but at least, I have things set up and it's going to be a fairly straightforward road to getting that stuff in. I have another video where I go through these Telescope customizations, and so check that out, and definitely check out Telescope. It is awesome, so easy to configure. The API is so nice to work with, so you definitely check that out. Status line, as I said, this is my Galaxy line settings. you have your typical status line API. They're all the same, whether it's Lightline in VimScript or this, you're working on your different status line segments and putting stuff in there, whether it's, buffer numbers or your get stuff. And so, for instance, I like to have my buffer number. I have to be able to see it so that later I can come back and get it. And yes, of course, you have a buffers picker you can always look at, or LS, and you can always see, but I like to be able to just see it and know it, and it just makes me feel better. And then of course you have your get branch stuff and get root, and you can basically do whatever you want. I'll probably do a separate video on status lines in general. Galaxy line is nice, but basically you could do this yourself, without too much effort. But there's some nice plumbing in Galaxy line and some of the other ones, and you have this nice API. I mean, you could just directly put these things in your status line and organize it that way, but it's nice to have this abstraction from Galaxy line and others. I liked Lightline a lot, and the API for that was nice too. And they all work the same. Obviously, it's just putting a layer on top of your status line segments and putting stuff in the different segments and changing them based on whether or not they're active and that sort of thing. And then for completion, this is just my compy settings. And again, you could just say, put a compy Lua file in a plugins folder and have it specific to compy. But there's always a possibility that I use a different completion solution later, or an additional one. So no matter what, I will use this completion file to keep track of things and change things. It's just really nice to have. Now for config, this was just pretty much laziness for me. I stuck tree sitter configuration in here and LSP configuration in here, some of it. What's nice about this is it sends the diagnostics from the LSP to your quick fix list, and quick fix list is very nice and convenient to use. But what's great is that you can use Telescope to view your quick fix list and go through and check things out. Those are the main things to look at when you're going through and migrating from VimScript to Lua. And because of the nature of the Lua API, you're generally going to end up with better organization, better management, and even kind of a better understanding of how Vim works, because it's maybe a little bit less abstracted than VimScript. And yes, it can get verbose in some areas, but it's very clear what your intentions are. So the semantics are very clear. If you are a longtime Vim user, then you likely have the same hobby that I do, and that is constantly tinkering with your Vim configuration. It's a part-time job tinkering with your Neovim config, not because there's anything wrong with it. It's just kind of fun to refactor it, and I am always tinkering with my Neovim config, and working with Lua is, really, really nice. So this Lua API is great, and they're building on it. Anyway, I encourage you to take a look at the documents that will be linked to in the description. You can also look at my dot files for this in the What's That Smell repo. So enjoy your transition to Lua. You're going to get better semantics, better organization. It's going to be cleaner. And if you're a hardcore Vim user, you're not going to be able to help it. You're going to want to do it. It's not just doing it for the sake of doing it. it really does end up being a better, cleaner experience with, using better software practices to organize your Neovim config. Because let's face it, that's your favorite project. Enjoy yourself. Best of luck. And I'll be back with more videos on Neovim, Rust, JavaScript, Neovim. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.